Hello class, welcome to Management 300, Principles of Management, Lesson 6. Your learning objectives this week, after completing this lessons, you should be able to explain the meaning and benefits of employee diversity, develop an awareness of the unique perspectives, problems, and issues of diverse employee groups, understand the demographic trends in the labor force and their managerial implications, describe the challenges firms may face in the management of diversity, describe the various approaches that managers may use to enjoy the benefits of employee diversity and meet the challenges associated with diversity. In the next chapter, you'll explain what makes leaders unique, distinguish between management and leadership, recognize how leaders use different power bases to enforce influence, differentiate effective and ineffective leaders, use individualized goals to increase employee motivation, apply basic reinforcement principles to stimulate desired employee behaviors, and become aware of the role of needs in employee motivation. Your reading assignments for this week include chapters 11 and 12, Managing Employee Diversity for chapter 11, chapter 12, Leading and Motivating Others. Be sure to review your course syllabus and assignments for additional readings and videos potentially. This week, you have two activities, the exam on chapters 11 and 12, as well as your discussions. Be sure to post to discussion questions 1 and 2. Attend class or post in discussion questions 3 and 4. If you're a fully online student, be sure you do discussions questions 3 and 4. This week, we'll examine the meaning of diversity. There are a wide spectrum of differences between people on an individual as well as a group level. There are advantages of employee diversity, which include things like a better market access, improved international competition, multiplicity of points of view, better team performance. But there are also disadvantages and challenges, which include pressures towards homogeneity, lower cohesiveness, interpersonal conflict and tensions, which arise because different people and relationships, and then confusing employee diversity with affirmative action. An important term in this process of understanding diversity is the concept of ethnocentrism, which occurs when people believe that their way of doing things, their values, and their norms are inherently superior to those of other groups and cultures. Segregated communication channels is an issue. Communication flows may be greater within groups than between groups. In other words, people that fit within a specific cultural group or team or whatever are more likely to communicate with each other than when they are trying to communicate with those that are outside the group. So segregated communication channels important to keep in mind when trying to manage diversity. Cohesiveness is a measure of how emotionally close group members are and how supportive they are of each other. Affirmative action is not the same thing as diversity. Affirmative action is a government-mandated program. Diversity recognizes that as a result of demographic changes, organizations must employ women and minorities in order to succeed. Diversity today, formerly many immigrants tried to blend into the American way of life quickly. Now many immigrants wish to maintain what makes them different. This chapter looks at a lot of different groups within the American workforce, specifically African Americans, which make up 11.8% of the U.S. workforce. Discrimination has resulted in poverty, segregated housing, fewer educational opportunities, and severe underrepresentation in managerial and professional jobs. Institutional racism is now illegal, however, bigotry remains a problem in the workforce. Asian Americans, 3% of the U.S. population, include Japanese, Chinese, Korean, Indian, and Pakistani individuals. They are underrepresented in managerial positions, yet the average household income is 16% greater than that of white Americans. Disabled Americans are estimated to be about 50 million Americans, 55.8% employment rate within that group, less prone to absenteeism and turnover than other employees. Foreign-born Americans are estimated at being about 10% of Americans. During the 1996 to 2011, the U.S. received 27% of the world's international migrants. Hispanic Americans make up 1 in 10 Americans, encompass a wide variety of groups. Language and skin color can pose problems for Hispanics in the workplace, particularly for recent immigrants. Homosexuals estimates vary from 1 to 10%, which is huge and hard to fathom. why it's such an unclear number. They're often considered an invisible minority. Up until recently, I think there's been no legal protection from discrimination. Many gays and lesbians keep their sexual orientation secret in the workplace, fearing intolerance. Older workers, average age of the workforce is now 42. Growth of the service sector means the physical strength and health are less important for a successful career. Many older workers perform service jobs as well as they did 20 years earlier, but they often face discrimination in the workplace. Religious diversity. Americans are of many different religious faiths. Many firms are developing policies concerning tolerance for religious diversity. Topics include permissible garments at work, how to deal with religious holidays, potential religious harassment, and displays of religious symbols on company premises. Undocumented workers make up at least 11 million workers in the U.S. that are here without immigration papers. 57% of those are from Mexico. Restrictive immigration laws and huge demand of services of undocumented workers in many sectors. Women make up about half the U.S. labor force. Firms in the U.S. are not required to provide maternity leave. Glass ceiling limits professional opportunities, and men and women have different communication styles. Building on diversity, there's a wheel that looks at the ways that you can provide strategies for improving the management of diversity, including linking diversity initiatives to business strategies and objectives, holding managers accountable for diversity, carrying out development activities to support diversity, encouraging diversity networks, and then having a top management commitment to diversity. There are some other ways that aren't directly linked, but you can do things like accommodating various family needs and conducting diversity audits to see how you are doing. Management accountability tools include such things as a 360-degree feedback, employee surveys, employee performance appraisals, and self-evaluations. Developmental activities include diversity training, senior monitoring, apprenticeships, and diversity learning labs. Accommodating family needs might have things like daycare assistance, flexible work schedules and arrangements, compressed work weeks, job sharing, telecommuting, care assistance for elderly dependents, paid time off to care for ill family members, paid parental leave, minimizing relocations, assistance in finding positions for spouses within the company, and job assistance for relocated spouses. So diversity's got a very wide range of topics that impact a business. Again, be sure you go back and review each of the learning objectives, the different terms, and so on. And that would be that chapter. Moving on to the chapter on leadership. Some questions. An important question is, what makes it for an effective leader? Is it personal characteristics like charisma, perseverance, strong communication skills? Or is it simply being in the right place at the right time, the ability to influence other people? Management skills for leadership include influence skills, delegation skills, flexibility skills, motivational skills. Management versus leadership. Essentially, it's important to understand that not all leaders are managers and not all managers are leaders. Power and leadership. There are a wide range of types of power: coercive power, reward power, legitimate power, expert power, referent power. Be sure to review these terms so you understand exactly what they mean in the context that they're defined in business. Practices associated with leadership by managers include things like facilitating task completion within the unit, supervising, rewarding, meeting personal needs of subordinates, and acting as boundary spanners, meaning that a good leader will reach out to other parts of the organization for the necessary resources or connections that employees need within their teams to do their jobs well. Why does a person become a leader? Traditional explanations include things like trait theories or leadership style or behavioral theories or contingency theories. Trait theory is the approach has not been successful in explaining leadership. What specific trait makes for a good leader? Well, a good trait in one leader, you put that, you try to develop that trait, but it doesn't necessarily translate to being a good leader for others. Behavioral theories include things like behavioral dimensions, consideration of employee-oriented behaviors, initiating structures of or production-oriented behaviors. There's a managerial grid that kind of walks you through concern for people versus concerns for production. Looking at that typical kind of high versus low arrangement of ideas, looks at different styles of management: country club management, team management, middle of the road management, impoverished management, and authority compliance style managers. Leadership styles, they define 3 types: autocratic, democratic, or laissez-faire. Common terms, but make sure you know what they mean in the context of leadership styles. Contingency theories, there are a couple that to be familiar with: Fiedler's contingency model and the path goal theory. Fiedler's contingency model looks at the factors of the situation, the leader-member relationships, the task structures, the positions of power, and then the 2 major leadership styles include task-oriented leadership or relationship-oriented leadership. So it provides some examples of when to be task-oriented as a leader versus when to be relationship-oriented. There's a good diagram that looks at the different types of situations you might use under different types of conditions. The path goal theory is the extent to which leaders respond appropriately on a case-by-case basis. So looking, so unique characteristics of the followers and the peculiarities of a situation determine how a leader will motivate its followers. Contemporary leadership issues today include attribution theory, leadership substitution, charismatic leadership, transformational versus transactional leadership, an important concept to understand. Post-heroic leadership, self-leadership, leadership and emotional intelligence, and leader-member exchange. Charismatic leaders propose major changes, offer strategic vision that inspires others, carefully assesses the needs of followers, projects self-confidence, and provides an idealistic role model. Transactional leaders are leaders who use legitimate, coercive, or reward power to elicit obedience. Transformational leaders revitalize organizations by instilling the followers the ability to question standard modes of operating. Post-heroic leadership includes such things as making people responsible for their own performance, creating an environment in which each person can figure out what needs to be done and then do it well, point the way and then clear the path so that people succeed, and then give people credit where credit is due. Emotional intelligence looks at such things as self-awareness, impulse control, persistence, confidence, self-motivation, empathy, social deftness, trustworthiness, adaptability, and talent for collaboration. Motivation has a lot of different ways of looking at motivation. You have goal-setting theories, reinforcement theories, need theories, human relations perspectives, work design theories, people's perceptions, and commitment and motivation. Reinforcement theory looks at positive reinforcement and negative reinforcements, as well as extinction and punishment concepts. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the bottom rung of that, physiological needs, meeting the basic human needs, moving to safety and security needs, moving up to the need to belong and social needs, self-esteem, and self-actualization. Very common structure for understanding the nature of needs. Other needs theory include Alderfer's ERG theory and McClellan's needs theory. Be sure you review those concepts in greater detail. Human relations perspective looks at theory X and theory Y. Theory X, nobody likes to work, you have to force people to do what they need to do, versus theory Y, which is, people actually potentially like and enjoy working, but it's important to create the conditions where they can do their jobs and do them well. Work design theories, a couple here: Herzberg's two-factor theory and Hackman-Oldman model. Be sure you're familiar with those. People's perceptions, look at a couple of theories: expectancy theory and equity theory. Again, make sure you understand those concepts. And then lastly, commitment and motivation looks at the idea of employee commitment is built around two characteristics going into that: the internalization of an organization's values and goals, as well as the identification of the self with the firm. So that the more a person identifies with the firm and the more they understand the values and goals of an organization, the more committed they are to an organization. So a strong employee drive to do what's best for the organization would be someone who firmly believes in the organization and feels like they're part of that culture, and that their role within that culture is important. Again, be sure to review each of the learning objectives, review all the diagrams and charts, make sure you understand all the key terms, and you should do well on the test and understand the principles of management for this section. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed the video.